felt like I was turning to psychedelics for was to get past the shame because it wasn't helping anything at
Right.
all, and it wasn't necessary. I needed to, I mean, for me, the opportunity was there to turn around how I saw this because what we had done was really quite beautiful. What we'd been able to accomplish, again, was really rare. And if we could just focus on what we had done well versus, what we could have done differently, yeah, that I needed to get into that space, and I really couldn't get there.
Hi, I'm Rachel Green, Brooklyn-based divorce mediator and collaborative attorney, and this is my podcast, Keep the Kids in Mind. Join me as I chat with other industry professionals about everything from smoothly navigating your way through divorce to prenups, all the while keeping the kids in mind. Hi, welcome to Keep the Kids in Mind. I'm very happy to have April Pride as our guest today. April works with people using psychedelics for therapeutic reasons, and also works with people who are divorcing and helps to reduce friction with psychedelic therapy. So I'm so interested in learning more about what April does and how she can help people who are working with families in transition. Welcome, April.
Thank you so much for having me, Rachel. Yes, I'm very much looking forward to this show.
Yeah, great. So I guess just to start, why don't you tell us a bit about how psychedelic therapy can help reduce friction for divorcing couples?
Sure. If I could please, I'd like to back up a little bit because I'm not a
Oh, of course.
facilitator. Yeah. So I do work in psychedelics. I work in cannabis. I'm a creative entrepreneur. So I have a podcast called The High Guide, and our last season is a very personal season for me. It was the 4th season, and this is my second podcast. So I've written and recorded over, 150 episodes of podcasts in the last 4 years. And so, yeah, this last season that was very personal. It's ketamine for divorce, depression, and dependency. And I've been working with women who choose unorthodox modalities for healing since 2015 when I entered into the cannabis space. And I guess more correctly, I've been working with women since 2016. When I launched my first cannabis company, I had started working in cannabis the year before. And when I launched my company, I'm a designer by training. I created stash accessories to store, smoke, and share cannabis. But what I found out was that the way that the plant connected with a woman's body was very specific. And nobody was talking about this. There was no research, but there were tons of anecdotal stories.
Wow. So just as in many other areas, the medical profession does not study how things impact women.
No. Oh, we're almost 10 years later. There's not,
Right. Wow.
yeah, yeah. So, what I found with cannabis was I didn't have my own stash until I was 40 years old, and it was legal here in Washington state. So I'm late to life, a little bit of a late bloomer. But during the pandemic, and I was super grateful for it during that time. And prior to that time, it really has helped me a lot with anxiety. I had stopped drinking, so it's been great for that. And I do drink every once in a while, but not the way that I used to, and certainly with the help of cannabis. When I got divorced, I gave myself a year to kind of climb out of how I was feeling. And I moved out in September 2021. So it was still fresh with the pandemic right behind us. And what I realized about a year in is that I was dealing with functional depression. I had no idea what that was, but it basically means that you can live your life and everyone on the outside thinks that things are fine, but you're spending a lot of time alone.
Yeah.
And I had isolated myself.
And how long had you been married?
I've been with my partner since we were 22.
Oh
We
my
graduated.
gosh.
Yeah, we
That's
graduated
really a
college
shock.
together.
That's
It
like a whole new chapter of your life to be without that person.
My best friend, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was, it has been a great, we had mediation, we worked with a family counselor, it was every Friday for 6 weeks. We knocked it out. It was, so that part of the divorce, luckily for us, I wasn't managing the blowback from that specific
Right.
event,
I
right?
mean, it's so hard to have such a change in your intimate life, but at least the legal process didn't make it even worse, compounding the stress and anger and anxiety that can happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a child of divorce. So my parents were divorced when I was 9. And I mean, you remember the moment you were told, you remember what
Yeah.
happened afterwards, right? So, and I have a very beautifully blended family. Um, so, and since I told you my ex-husband and I have been together since 22, so he's grown up with them as well. And we knew that this was possible, that we could do this moving into the future, not under one roof, but certainly still as a family.
You had
Doesn't
seen role models for that. It sounds like your parents navigated that well.
Yeah, super. I didn't know, obviously,
Yeah.
until I was
Right.
older, that was very rare.
Right.
Yeah. So, so what I needed to do was to not escape, and cannabis is certainly something that, for me, can help just take the pain away, right? It helps with symptoms. What I found working in psychedelics starting in 2021, as I use podcasts to really start to investigate something that I'm curious about. So I've spent the last 2 years really getting to know this space. And I don't know, do you think it's a coincidence that at one of the saddest times in my life, I end up working with healers all the time, interviewing them and researching them? It's really interesting, actually, and I
Yeah.
feel really grateful. I started trying to stop smoking cannabis about a year in with the help of microdosing psilocybin. But before that, I had taken myself on, I wouldn't say huge psilocybin experiences, but I was every 3 months, I was putting eye mask on, taking about 2 to 3.5 grams of mushrooms and really letting myself feel the pain of this versus like, it's going to be okay. The kids are great and I'm going to be fine. And yay, there's,
So
yeah.
that's interesting. So microdosing was helping you like to face the feelings and feel them and live them in a way that was too overwhelming. It sounds like if you weren't, just
Well, there are a couple
like it.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first is when I took my first larger dose of psilocybin, I cried in a way that I hadn't cried since my dad told
Oh,
me my parents were getting divorced. I could tell. I mean,
oh my
there's
God.
only one type of cry that is.
That's really deep.
It was really hard because it was the week I moved out. And that was also by design. It's okay. It's easier for me to recreate a home than it is for him. And we got to keep the family home, which is great. Um, that I was really, really grateful for. But the microdosing, it took away the compulsion to to reach for cannabis and to just make that feeling go away and just sit with it for, you don't, it's not long. It will pass on its own. But microdose took away that compulsion to reach for something to just numb out a bit
Hmm.
and get past it. And then you're into your evening and you can distract yourself with more positive things like meeting a friend for a walk or whatever the case may be. And that, I would say, a year in really started to transform things when I was contacted by a ketamine company to for their lead clinician to be a guest on my show, The High Guide. And I had negative impression of ketamine. It's the only substance that's been labeled a psychedelic that has a high propensity to addiction or to abuse, I should say abuse. So, I mean, I didn't want to be there were already so many things happening with high potency cannabis in the industry in terms of we have a lot of findings now of um, how much more likely a young person under 18 is how much more likely they're to have developed cannabis use disorder in their lifetime, and adults, because we are putting products on shelves that are over 20% THC, and our brains were not designed to take in that much THC on a regular basis. So I did not want to be a part of another commercialization of a plant that had been Frankensteined, or a fungus, or whatever the case may be, nature that had been Frankensteined by man for revenue, right? So ketamine was something I was really, really reticent about. And then I started talking to medical experts and hearing stories of, I mean, miracles, right? I didn't suffer from treatment-resistant depression. I don't have um, major depressive disorder. And those are the diagnoses that someone can receive a prescription for ketamine for. And there's only one FDA-approved ketamine drug that is covered by insurance, and that is not what the company who called me was offering to patients. It was a low dose ketamine at home, about $100 per lozenge that they send you, versus, it can be up to $700 a treatment. So I am very much an advocate for democratizing all of this and making sure everyone has access equally, including payment. So $100 was about as good as you're going to get. And I went through the process myself, separate. They didn't know that I was going through the screening process with doctors to see if I did qualify. I did qualify. And that's when I started to realize that I was walking around with functional depression. And after the first treatment, I didn't smoke cannabis for a month. And I had 4 treatments. I've been able to reset my relationship with cannabis. But I think the bigger part of this is I had no idea that I was depressed.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you were you didn't think that you would qualify to get the what's the one legal use for ketamine that the FDA did approve?
There are 2.
There are 2. Okay.
Yep, they were approved a year apart. The first that was approved was treatment-resistant depression, and the second one was major depressive disorder.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were interested in trying ketamine, but you didn't know that you would qualify under either of those diagnoses.
Well, those are the 2 diagnoses that that you can receive a prescription to an FDA-approved drug.
Mm-hmm.
Ketamine is legal. It's used all the time in hospitals since 1971 as an analgesic and an analgesic, and puts you under help.
Oh, right.
Anesthesia. Yeah.
Right.
Anesthesia. Thank you. And so it's used off-label for treatment of PTSD, OCD,
I
depression.
see.
And so that's what the clinics that you'll see that are IV clinics, or there are clinics that do intramuscular shots. They offer ketamine for other diagnoses and it can be used off-label, but again, it's more expensive. The FDA approved drug is a nasal spray, and it's the only one that's a nasal spray. So
Oh, I see.
Mhm.
Interesting. And is it used also for addiction?
Yes, it is, right? And I did know that. So when they contacted me, again, that's for off-label use.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, don't you think that's ironic that the most
Right.
likely substance to be abused also helps people come off of their substances? So that's why
Yeah, no,
using
that's
these.
funny. I wasn't making that connection. I was
Yeah.
thinking like smoking, eating disorders, like other addictions. I wasn't thinking about people who have drug addictions and then using. But does ketamine even help with other drug addictions?
Yes, it can. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Mhm. So, that's what I found with cannabis, right? Because cannabis is also something, it helped me stay clear of alcohol and reduce my
Right.
alcohol intake, but I also found myself using it too often. I mean,
Mhm.
I know that about my personality, so I know that it's something that can sneak up on me. Um, but the ketamine, it reset what I learned, because I did an entire season, 6 episodes on this, and I talked to doctors, and I have a diagnosis of ADHD, and I was really, really surprised to learn how the the chemical ketamine itself repairs our brains. So whether you have a diagnosis of ADHD or not, cortisol is something that breaks down parts of our neurological system over time. Cortisol is produced by stress, the stress hormone, and there are like these finger-like extensions on our in our brain called dendrites that are part of our neuroreceptors. And so when they are confronted with cortisol, there's too much stimulation. They're getting too much serotonin. They're getting too much dopamine. They're getting too much. And so they shut down because they feel like, oh, we need fewer receptors to capture essentially these neurotransmitters. And they shrivel up, and then you don't have receptors that are available to bind with these happy hormones. And so what ketamine does is it actually repairs those dendrites.
Wow.
And they come back out, and then they're available to you again. And that's neuroplasticity. And you're at a high level of neuroplasticity, meaning you can affect if you have pathways you've carved in your brain to do something the same way over and over again during this 72, sometimes a 5-day window after a ketamine treatment, you can start to retrain your brain to do things differently. And so that's what it is. Yeah. It takes, you can't just take a pill or take the lozenge and then wake up and things. You journal, you spend time in nature, you find friends that make you laugh, right? You're really trying to keep your brain in a healthy state.
So is that one of the things you do, or maybe I'm just jumping ahead, but like you would kind of create a program for somebody where they journal and they're, taking ketamine at your with your instructions, and you would help like guide them through this journey to grow more dendrites and
No, I'm not a facilitator. So part of the democratization of this is having a podcast that people can figure this out on their own.
I see.
Yeah, because it's expensive. It's hundreds of dollars to work with a facilitator. So I have lots of them that I've met, and they're always happy to come on the show. In fact, I was talking because we're moving into in-person events here in Seattle, and I was talking to someone yesterday, and I realized, these healers, people that do work with the medicine, most of them are underground and have been working this way for a long time, and they can't come out and have an Instagram live. And, so I see my role as, who's helping the healers who are healing everybody if they're worried about their social media feed,
Yeah, I see. Wow.
Yeah, so I feel like I have a platform for those people to help others, and I'm just learning by osmosis. I'm a communicator, so I feel like that's my gift here to what people are trying to achieve.
Yeah, I see. That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so do you think that in a divorce process, I work as a mediator primarily and also as a collaborative attorney, and both processes kind of require the couple to be like moving together, and if one person is not, like often in a divorce, one person has initiated and the other person is in shock, and the initiator might have been thinking about this like on and off for 3 years, just like letting the thought, like the door open like an inch in their head, like, is there a way out? No, I made a commitment to this relationship, like there's no, I'm not going to leave it. And then things are bad 3 or 4 months later, and they again have that thought like, well, should I consider ending the marriage? And maybe they're like letting themselves slowly get used to the idea over a couple of years, and then the other person is like, bam, hit by a truck, just knew that there were stresses in the marriage, but just never thought it was going to end. And that's that's very typical. So in mediation or in a collaborative process, we're not going to get from here to there unless both people are together in, I'm just looking to make sure my fingers show, um, that like if one person is here, then we have to wait and give the other person time to catch up. They can't get to the finish line, only one of them. So I'm just wondering, like, I guess any kind of therapy would change the speed of the processing and, working through the emotions.
Mhm.
And I guess it's best if both people are working on themselves, but they're not always in the same place.
I mean, for all the good that I'm grateful, the end of my marriage represented and, the way that it felt, part of it was because there was this, obviously I have a curiosity to learn and grow um, and my partner, he has a pretty good life. I don't think he's just like, I don't know why we need to unpack all this and look at it too much. Right.
Mhm.
So, there's just you either want to look at it or you don't. And that means you're going to get there at different times.
Right.
So when you
Right.
talk about introducing psychedelics into as a therapy to move through divorce, first of all, you have to think about the law because it's probably not legal where you live, unless you live in Oregon and you're going through the right means.
Is
Um,
Oregon the only state
Oregon's
where?
the only state that's legalized psilocybin at the state level. Seattle, where I live, is the largest North American city to decriminalize entheogens, which includes psilocybin. That is mm, I'm playing within that framework right now. That's where the live events are coming in because there's messaging around decriminalization that people who are voters need to understand what they're voting for when they say yes to decriminalization. You may also be voting to kind of a free-for-all in terms of a psychedelic economy, not it not being regulated quite yet. And, you know, chocolate bars with psilocybin getting to my 16-year-old kid, on his campus. We have to be really, really careful how we roll this out. But I am definitely an advocate for decriminalization because legalization is taxation. And we just don't want people going to jail for this. We don't necessarily want to be taxed because we choose to pick something out of the ground, right? Um, so I think there's a real opportunity to do this differently than we did in cannabis if we can focus on the decriminalization part of things and really understand what we're saying yes to under legalization so that we can ensure that there's equal access. Um, I'm getting a bit off topic, sorry. So you just have to be very, very careful where you live, right? Because I would hate for anyone's divorce to go sideways because their partner found out that they were pursuing this and it wasn't something that they were aligned with. Doing this together is something that I would imagine you'd want to try before you find yourself looking at divorce, right? Because there
Yeah.
is the potential to heal together, to grow together. After the divorce, it's highly unlikely you're going to be doing psychedelics together. So I see this. I just wish more women knew that they had this as an option for healing because a lot of my friends choose wine and it did the same thing that cannabis did for me, which is just kind of get you through and help to numb things. But at a certain point, you wake up to the reality. You have to take care of yourself, right? Now you're the only one. You're the
Right.
only, right? You're the only one taking care of your kids. And
Yeah.
for me, I thought I was doing everything right, but I was really going through the motions and I wasn't going to get my boys and I to a place that we were secure financially and all the rest of it if I just couldn't snap out of it. And I
Yeah.
needed some help. Yeah.
So the cannabis and the alcohol numbed things to an extent that you could somewhat function, but didn't help you actually heal. It didn't help you really experience what you were feeling and kind of have more eyes open and thinking um, like like focusing on what you're running from, but not where you're running to.
Perfectly said. Wow. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's great.
Um,
Yeah.
so it sounds like the psychedelics helped you kind of process and feel like almost more intensely going in and feeling like this is my truth with this whole experience. And then that like helped you to like move through it and get to the next
Yeah.
part. Yeah.
Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
Rachel, I was so surprised at how much shame I had. And I've been listening to divorce podcasts for a while. And I was, I guess, relieved to know that I wasn't alone in that.
Yeah.
But I was certainly floored. I guess I wasn't floored by it, right? Like I said earlier, I'm a child of divorce. This is not how I planned it. I married my college sweetheart. It was all on track. And then at age 44, exactly double the amount of years we had been
Oh, wow.
together.
You've been together. Yeah.
Yeah. I looked at this and I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
I don't
But
know.
it's so astonishing to me in today's world that people still feel shame, but people do. They feel like if it's their personal failure, and society-wide, so many people are divorced, so many people are children of divorce. It happens, and yet there's still like these deep feelings of stigma. And like, I don't think there's stigma, if you're applying for a job or meeting people at a social event. I mean, if somebody tells me they're divorced, well, of course I work in divorce, so it's different. Everybody I see is divorcing, but I mean, I don't feel like there's judgment from me of anybody else. It's like the next step in their journey is not with this partner, and it happens for myriad reasons. But people still do internalize, like we're all like beating ourselves up all the time, and feeling like a failure, and so that's like it's actually great to talk about this, because I think people hold it inside like a secret.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I felt like I was turning to psychedelics for, was to get past the shame, because it wasn't helping anything at
Right.
all. And it wasn't necessary. I needed to, I mean, for me, the opportunity was there to turn around how I saw this, because what we had done was really quite beautiful. What we'd been able to accomplish, again, was really rare. And if we could just focus on what we had done well versus, what we could have done differently. Yeah, that I needed to get into that space, and I really couldn't get there. And so ketamine, it's a dissociative, which means that you kind of separate from your body, and you can see things as a curious third party observer versus being so emotionally attached to the situation that you just can't get past feeling this specific way about something you did wrong. That's where the loop would go. Ketamine came in and broke that loop and allowed me to really confront it exactly the way that you just laid it out. Like, this happens. Lots of people are divorced. You're not alone. You're not the only person that has lived, like all of the things that make you feel smaller, not like, that you're the center of the universe and your problem is all that matters, right? There's just a way you just need to change, because it's all you're doing. You're seeing your kids cry,
Oh, yeah.
it's
Right. Well,
yeah,
you're looking for evidence to confirm that that you screwed up,
yeah.
and
You
you can
should feel
find
bad.
it. When you're looking for it, you can
Yeah,
find it. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the ketamine helped you kind of break that pattern and
Yes.
forgive yourself, it sounds like.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah.
and let yourself like, let this go.
Yeah.
Let me put this burden down and, move forward without it. Yeah.
And that, I mean, really truthfully is a process.
Yeah.
It is a process, right? My 16-year-old son got in a car accident this weekend. He's fine. But you start to like, would he have done that if his dad and I were still,
Oh,
just,
yeah.
I don't know. It's new, all new to me. So I'm guessing there will
Yeah.
be things that pop up that make me wonder if, things have been different, then it would
But,
be.
you never know how things would be
Yes.
different.
No, of course. Of
Yeah.
course, because my ex-husband and I see each other frequently. I was over there last night. I have opportunities to kind of wonder, could it have, and I mean, the reality is, yeah, it's just a long life to be with one person is how I explained it to my kids. And I just, like, you don't know who you're going to be after 40. Trust me.
Yeah, no, that's
And
certainly true.
yes, it's biological, right?
Yeah.
It's the adult adolescence. We're trying to stop living the way that we've been told we should. And we want to start living for ourselves. And oh my goodness, but I've had this whole life here. And so I really needed the strength to be able to explain to them, like, you never know where your life is going to go. And your dad and I just want to give you an example of what this can look like if
Right.
it needs to change. And you have other people that you're accountable to and that you love and you're responsible for, and you want to do it in a way that's healthy. I mean, yeah, that's sort of all I got at this point.
Well, I have to admit that from my vantage point, it sounds like, the two of you navigated the divorce process incredibly well, like really keeping your kids in mind and um and being very like straightforward with them and letting them have the feelings that they have, letting them know they didn't do anything that caused this, that they'll always have two parents who love them even if you decided not to live in the same home. I mean,
Mhm.
it sounds like you did this phenomenally well. So I have to give you credit for that, even though you were also having your internal struggles. And, as they
Yeah.
say, don't judge your insides by someone else's outsides.
Hmm.
I mean, I think probably it's universal, those feelings.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, there are just so many moments of gratitude because I have friends who have experienced traumatic divorces,
Yeah,
and I don't know how you just really juggle all of that emotionally. It's hard.
right, right. It is. So, what do you think would be the next steps for someone who's listening, watching this podcast, um, and who's interested in exploring this further? And maybe lives, I mean, probably lives not in Seattle or Oregon.
Right.
um, what would you, where would you tell them to go, or what podcasts should they watch next? To just get more information and maybe try to pursue therapeutic use of ketamine or other psychedelics.
Well, ketamine is something that most states you're going to be able to find a provider. And
Mhm.
again, it's not illegal. It's prescribed off label,
Right, I
right?
see.
So ketamine is going to be probably the safest modality to pursue. Um, but you must work with a doctor. You must work with somebody. Again, it's used in operating rooms.
Right.
So, episode 51 is the start, or episode 50, sorry, is the start of our season 4 on ketamine for divorce, depression, and dependency. And episode 53 is where we talk about ketamine for depression. And that really gets into the meat of how this particular um, intervention can help people. And I would say start just by listening to the symptoms that I was experiencing, the feelings I was experiencing, and see if that sounds familiar to you. Because I didn't know that I was even experiencing depression, right? So you may not realize it either, especially if you're still getting a paycheck or you're a student maybe and you're still making great grades, you're getting up out of bed in the morning, you don't have something that looks like a traditional what you would think of as a person who's depressed.
Right. And that's so interesting too, because I had terrible depression for probably 20 years of my life. And every time I would take one of those quizzes, are you depressed? It would say no, because I was still functioning.
Yeah.
So, that's such an important point.
Yeah, I would I which I didn't know that people walked around with high functioning depression until last year, right? So, and I'm 40, how old am I? 47 years old. Yeah. So, and I think, but I may have been getting things done, but I was not moving in the direction I needed to be moving, right? There's a
Yeah,
big difference. And
right.
so, yeah, I would say start by listening to the podcast, because there are different ways that you can um, administer ketamine. And so I think it's also important to know what might work for you or the outcome you're looking for, which one would be good for you. Lozenges are more low dose, and then there are higher dose options, but and both have a place, right? So you just sort of need to figure out where you might be. I think more than anything, you're being asked to recreate a life. That is very overwhelming. Whether or not you're staying in your house or not staying in your house, all kids are, you're getting along with your children or your ex or whatever the case may be. You have to recreate an entire life. It has to look totally different. And nobody tells you that. No one says that when you go to your first dinner party and you don't have a partner in tow, that you are treated very differently than you were if you have a partner with you. I had no idea that you're now part of a different club.
Right.
Right. And so
Right. And sometimes people don't get invited because,
yeah,
the host doesn't want to have an odd number of people for some strange reason.
And people just don't want to get in the middle of it.
Right.
Right. No matter how easy you make it for them to say hello to both of you, and neither one of you will punish. You're not going to be punished by either one of us. It's just very hard for people to wrap their head around, like, oh, we can not be mean to one of you. Everyone's looking for someone to blame.
Right. Everybody feels like they have to choose one person, that they can't be friends with both, which, I mean, that's not true.
Right.
And especially if the two of them are getting along, there's no reason that you can't, they can be cordial to each other.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can do everything right and still be faced, quote, right, and still be faced with these indignities. And I think treatments like ketamine help you come back into yourself and not judging yourself on the inside. By the way, people are judging you on the outside, or I think that was close to your quote, but very, very appropriate. Yeah. So just becoming more attuned to who you are and what you want moving forward, because that perhaps you initiated it. One of your lists, they initiated it. But they're having a hard time really stepping into this life that they decided they wanted. What's the point of all of the destruction, implosion, all the rest, starting over again, if you can't come to peace with it and start to enjoy that process?
Yeah.
And I'm really, really grateful for psychedelics helping me
No,
step
that's,
into that.
that's another great point, is that, even the person who initiates the separation could be having difficulty adjusting to the whole restructuring of their lives. Both people have to kind of reinvent themselves and figure out, okay, what is this next phase of my life going to look like? Where am I going to live? How am I going to furnish, my apartment? Who are my friends? What do I do on the weekends when I have the kids? What do I do on the weekends I don't have the kids? And there might not be room for the person who initiated. I mean, certainly the person who initiated is not going to talk to their former partner about this, because they'll just get like, well, you initiated this, but this, they still can have mixed feelings, I mean, about everything,
Sure. I mean, I initiated it, right? And yeah, you don't, what you want eventually, but you don't know what you've got to live through to get there.
Maybe. Right. Yeah, you don't see exactly where's the path,
And let me tell you, Rachel, that has really been my lesson. Like, you're living in the in-between. There's no destination. This sucks right now, and this is your life. Like, you can't escape it. You need to experience, you need to live this, you need to feel this, or else you're not going to be able to live the life that you so much wanted.
Right.
So,
and if you don't feel and experience it, then you don't move through it. You're just stuck.
Yeah. And one of the things I'm, most terrified of is, you have a lot of clarity when you leave a relationship, your role and its demise, your partner, how you chose that partner, why you chose that partner, why that might have not been the best fit for you, but at 22, you have no idea, So for me, I really wanted to make sure that the next partnership I got into, it was the right one for me at this time in my life. I wasn't going back and making the same choice I would have made at 22.
Right.
So I also needed probably some time to sort that out. And again, I think that ketamine and psychedelics has been very, very helpful to learn who I am now
Yeah.
and make different choices for the person that I am today, because it's very easy to fall into old patterns.
Right. Well, April, it's just been a pleasure talking to you. It's so interesting how you have so much knowledge about this subject, and I certainly am going to go and listen to your podcast, The High Guide, and learn more about this. And I appreciate, the intersection of your knowledge about the therapeutic use of these substances specifically for healing and getting through the phases of divorce.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule and getting up at the crack of dawn in Seattle, talking to me in New York. And best of luck to you and your family going forward with everything. So thanks so much for coming on. Keep the kids in mind.
Rachel, thank you for what you do. It's super important that people know it can be this way. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're trying to change the visions of what a divorce means.
Thank you.
One step at a time.
Very important work.
Yes, thanks.